Good evening, and welcome back to Bloody Lantern. Tonight, we're taking you on a journey along America's darkest, most haunted roads. 4 travelers, 4 highways, 4 nights of terror that will leave your heart pounding and your mind questioning reality. From the fog-choked highways of California to the silent deserts of Nevada, the twisting forests of New York, and the cursed stretches of Texas, these roads promised adventure, but delivered pure horror. So, lock your doors, roll up your windows, and whatever you do, don't pull over. Tonight you'll hear true accounts from those who barely made it back, their nerves shattered, their reality forever cracked. It was late October. The wind rattled the edges of Jenna and Mark's car as they left a music festival, heading home along Highway 1 in California. The fog rolled in thick, curling around headlights like a living thing. Every mile swallowed the road ahead, and every mile behind seemed to vanish. Jenna shivered, whispering, "It feels wrong." Mark laughed, trying to calm her, but even he couldn't ignore the eerie silence pressing down around them. Their tires crunched over wet asphalt, but the fog softened every sound, muffling the world outside their car. Then, they saw him, a man, standing in the middle of the sharp curve, holding a lantern. At first, Mark thought he needed help, but as the car drew closer, Jenna gasped. His face was featureless, smooth as porcelain, yet somehow staring straight at them. The lantern's glow flickered, casting shadows that seemed to reach toward their car. Mark tried to swerve, but the road behind them twisted unnaturally, looping endlessly into the fog. The GPS spun wildly, miles stretching impossibly, and the couple realized they were trapped. Hours passed in a matter of minutes. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching into impossible shapes. Whispers filled the car, soft, cold, calling Jenna's name. She looked at Mark, only to see his face mirrored in the passenger side window. Pale, empty, staring back at her like a ghost. The lantern figure began to move toward the car, slow but inevitable, its flame flickering in rhythm with their panicked hearts. The air inside the car grew frigid. Frost formed on the windshield despite the heater blasting. The fog thickened, swirling violently, and suddenly shapes appeared, dozens of faceless figures, all with lanterns flickering in the mist. They raised arms toward the car, moving closer yet silent. Jenna screamed, clutching Mark's arm. He slammed the gear into drive. The car lurched forward, the wheels spinning, but it felt like driving through a nightmare where the road itself resisted them. Finally, a faint light appeared ahead, sunlight breaking the fog. They drove toward it desperately. The figures vanished. The fog thinned. The normal road returned. Relief washed over them. But when they glanced in the rearview mirror, a single lantern floated behind, pulsing slowly, as if marking them. Jenna's hands shook uncontrollably. Mark couldn't speak. They knew they hadn't escaped fully. Not yet. As the fog lifted from California's coast, our journey takes us east, into the barren deserts of Nevada. Here, a trucker named Rick found that some highways are alive and the Desert D not forgive the unwary. Rick had been hauling cargo across Nevada for years, but this night felt different. The highway was empty, the air unusually still, and the stars seemed sharper, colder. Almost Pearson noticed a lone figure standing far ahead, illuminated by the dim glow of the moon. At first he assumed it was a hitchhiker, lost and seeking help. But as he approached, the air grew unnaturally cold, frost creeping along his windshield, forming tiny jagged patterns like icy claws. The figure was a man, motionless, staring directly at Rick with eyes that glowed an unnatural yellow. Rick slowed, heart hammering, and the man whispered, "Stay or die here." The word no sense, yet somehow he understood them perfectly. Fear coiled in his stomach like a living thing. He tried to drive past, but the highway seemed to stretch endlessly, sand and rock rippling as if alive. Rick's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The engine sputtered, yet his fuel gauge showed full. Every mile forward felt slower than the last, like time itself was bending. The hitchhiker remained at the roadside, always the same distance, never moving, yet somehow closer with every second. Then the whispers began, soft, indistinct, coming from every direction once. It sounded like the desert itself was speaking, warning, mocking, reaching into Rick's mind. Suddenly, a cold wind slammed the cab door, and the headlights flickered. Shadows danced across the sand dunes, forming shapes of twisted, skeletal hands. Rick's vision blurred as the around him seemed to stretch into infinity. He tried to accelerate, but the wheels spun helplessly over the asphalt, as if the road had become quicksand. Every instinct screamed to Eska, yet he was trapped in a nightmare that felt both eternal and immediate. Rick's heart raced as he noticed something on the sand, a set of footprints. They led from the hitchhiker directly to his truck. He stared, frozen in terror. The footprints glowed faint, pulsing like the beat of a monstrous heart. He tried to ignore them, slammed the truck into gear, and drove forward with all his might. But every time he glanced at the mirrors, more footprints appeared, always leading him, always following, vanishing into the shadows behind him. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed. The stars overhead seemed to swirl, and the wind carried whispers that spoke his name in 1,000 distorted voices. Then, in the faint distance, saw the highway straighten. Relief rushed in, but the sense of dread did not leave. He glanced once more at the rearview mirror, and the hitchhiker's glowing yellow eyes stared back at from the darkness, just for a heartbeat, before vanishing. From the silent desert, we moved north into the Catskill Mountains of New York. 4 college friends learned that some shortcuts are traps, and the forest sometimes remembers faces, even after the travelers have fled. It was a foggy October night when Emily, Jake, Sarah, and Liam decided to take a shortcut through the Catskills. The paved road quickly dissolved into a narrow, muddy path lined with gnaw trees, whose branches reached out like claws. The mist clung to everything, dampening the air and muffling their laughter, until silence settled in like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every step the car took seemed slower than the last, and the headlights barely cut through the swirling fog. As they drove deeper, shapes began to appear along the roadside, scarecrows, tall and thin, their faces grotesque and strangely familiar. Emily's stomach knotted when she recognized one. I had her brother's face, twisted in pain and silent scream. Jake tried to convince them it was a prank, but the unease was undeniable. Every time they blinked, the scarecrows seemed to mow slightly, closer to the road, closer to the car. Suddenly, the engine sputtered and died. Liam tried to restart it, but the car refused. The fog thickened, and in the distance, shadowy figures moved between the trees, whispering their names in voices that were not quite human. Panic set in. Every attempt to reverse only led them further into the forest. Branches clawed at the car, scraping along the sides like fingernails. The scarecrow's head seemed to tilt, watching them, calculating. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed as they navigated the winding, impossible road. Each turn seemed to loop back upon itself. Sarah screamed when she saw one of the scarecrows step onto the road directly in front of the car. But as she gasped, it vanished, leaving only the fog and the unsettling silence. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, felt amplified, malicious, alive and watching. Emily noticed that the faces on the scarecrows were changing. Sometimes her friends, sometimes strangers' faces from the town below. They twisted into expressions of horror, as if trapped between life and some other dark plane. Jake tried to drive faster, but the mud gripped the tires, and every time they tried to escape, the road curved unnaturally, leading them deeper in the forest. Finally, after what felt like eternity, the fog began to thin. They emerged onto a normal paved road, but the relief was short-lived. When they glanced in the rearview mirror, one of the scarecrow faces remained, smiling silently, as if it had hitched a ride with them. Fear gripped them in a way that no ordinary accident could. Finally, our journey ends in the barren stretches of Interstate 18, Texas. A long-haul driver named Sam discovered that some roads carry ghosts that follow you off the asphalt, into gas stations, and into your nightmares. At 1 a.m., Sam swerved to avoid a woman in a blood-soaked dress, her hollow black eyes fixed on him. Minutes later, she was inside the gas station he pulled into, standing perfectly still, watching him with a silent, intense stare. Her lips split unnaturally, forming words that twisted deep inside his mind, making every hair on his body stand on end. Terrified, Sam turned away. When he glanced back, she was gone. Only wet footprints led into the darkness outside, vanishing into the desert night. The truck's radio crackled with static, whispering his name, though no one else was on the road. The headlights flickered and shadows seemed to move independently of the desert around him, creeping closer, observing, waiting. Minutes or hours passed. Sam tried to convince himself it was fatigue, but the feeling of being watched never left. Every time he slowed for a turn, he felt eyes on the back of his neck, shadows flitting just beyond the reach of his headlights. The desert was silent again, yet alive, pulsating with the energy of something unseen, something hungry for travelers foolish enough to stop. Eventually, Sam reached the edge of the desert highway, where the lights of the next town appeared. Relief washed over him, but it was temporary. When he glanced in the rearview mirror, he swore he saw a shadow following him at a distance, keeping pace with the truck, as if the road itself had allowed it to move alongside him. He sped up, but the shadow never faltered, never disappeared, fading only when the first rays of dawn touched the asphalt. Sam never returned to that stretch of Interstate 10. Friends and fellow truckers would ask why, and he would only shake his head. Yet sometimes, years later, driving in a completely different desert, he would see figures standing silently on the roadside, their eyes hollow, their presence a silent warning. These roads aren't empty. The fog, the desert, the forests, the highways, they're alive, and they remember. From California to Nevada, New York to Texas, the highways of America hide shadows that wait for the unwary. If these stories chilled you to the bone, hit like, share, and subscribe to Bloody Lantern. Tell us where you're from in the comments and what your name could appear in our next story. Remember, lock your doors, keep your headlights high, and whatever you do, don't pull over.